The sky over the kingdom had turned the color of ash, and a thin fog curled over the cobblestone streets of the capital city. People moved silently, their heads bowed, eyes wet with grief. The Alpha King, who had ruled their lands with an iron hand tempered by fairness, was dead, or so the court declared. Word of his fall had spread like wildfire from the northern cliffs where the battle had claimed him, leaving fear and sorrow in its wake. Inside the palace, banners of black and deep crimson hung from the stone walls. The corridors, usually alive with guards and servants, now felt like a tomb. Every torch flickered, as though it carried the sadness of the entire kingdom in its flame. At the center of the grand hall lay the Alpha King's body, draped in ceremonial robes and surrounded by candles that threw long, trembling shadows on the walls. His chest, still faintly warm from the rituals of the court, seemed to promise a life that the world insisted was gone. Among the mourners, a young girl moved silently, her boots making no sound on the polished floor. She was Omega, a girl whispered about in the streets and alleys of the city. They called her a healer, a truth-seer, someone who could feel the pulse of the world beyond ordinary senses. Her dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, hiding the intensity of her golden eyes. Today, her heart thrummed not with grief, but with unease. Omega had felt the disturbance long before anyone else. The moment the king had fallen, something had shifted in the air. A tremor that no one could see but her, a heartbeat that did not belong to the living, pulsed through the palace. She knew instinctively he was not dead. Her thoughts were interrupted by the priests who began the final rites. They moved in strict patterns, chanting incantations that had been passed down through centuries. Each word was meant to guide the soul of the king to the afterlife, but Omega's gut twisted as she watched. The words felt wrong. The rhythm of the chants, instead of guiding, seemed to cage. The king's body, pale and still, drew her closer against her better judgment. Omega knelt at the edge of the dais. Her fingers hovered above the king's chest. The moment her skin brushed the edge of his ceremonial robes, a shiver raced up her arm. There it was again, a pulse. Subtle at first, but undeniable. The faintest twitch, as if his life had been paused rather than ended. She pulled back, fear mingling with hope. "Stay back." "Child," one of the priests barked, noticing her approach. His voice was sharp, laced with authority. "This is no place for meddling. The Alpha King is gone. Let the rites proceed." I think he's still alive," Omega whispered, her voice trembling but firm. She looked around at the mourners, many of whom glanced at her with suspicion. "Something is keeping him here, between life and death." The priest's eyes narrowed. "Blasphemy! Step away from the body before you bring shame upon yourself and this kingdom." But Omega could not move. She felt the king's faint pulse again, stronger now, as though he were reaching out to her. Shadows flickered unnaturally in the corners of the hall, bending toward him. The air grew colder, heavier, yet charged with something unspoken. A decision came swiftly, almost violently, from within her. She would not leave him. She would not let the court bury him while a thread of life still clung to him. The world might not understand, but she would act. When the priests turned to continue their chants, Omega slipped forward. Her feet made no sound on the marble floor, and the crowd, too stunned by the solemnity of the moment, did not notice her movement. Reaching the king's side, she placed her palms on his chest. A shock of energy shot through her hands, and for a heartbeat, she felt every pulse, every beat, every fragment of life trapped inside his body. The king was ensnared, caught by a curse older than the city itself. It had been placed there by the rivals of his bloodline, nobles who had long desired his throne. Their spell had feigned his death, but it had not claimed him fully. Omega gasped. She felt the fear, confusion, and stubborn pride that lingered in him. He was alive, yet suspended in darkness. and she was the only one who could guide him back. The candles flickered violently, and whispers echoed in the hall, low and melodic, almost like a song. The priests faltered in their chant, glancing around in alarm. Shadows seemed to stretch and curl toward the ceiling as if the room itself were alive. Omega held her ground, even as the whispers grew louder, calling her by name, warning her to step away. She ignored them. She had made her choice. Suddenly, the king's hand twitched. Omega froze, her heart lurching. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, it lifted again and pressed gently against her wrist. A shiver ran through her entire body. He was alive. He was truly alive. "By the stars, he moves," a guard whispered, backing away as if the very act of witnessing a miracle or a blasphemy would burn him. Omega's lips parted, a mixture of awe and fear crossing her face. "I knew it," she whispered to herself. "I knew you were not gone." The priests, realizing something unnatural was happening, shouted for the guards. "Stop her! She dares touch the king!" But Omega ignored them. She concentrated, drawing on the small reserves of her gift, the truth sight that let her feel what others could not. She whispered an incantation she had learned from old scrolls, words that could soothe, bind, and awaken. Shadows quivered as she chanted, curling around her and the king like dark silk. The king's chest heaved slightly, then again as his eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes, only slightly, and the world tilted around Omega. Golden brown irises, familiar yet distant, regarded her with confusion and pain. "You," he rasped, his voice raw, unsteady. "It's me," Omega said, her voice gentle, steady. "I won't let them bury you. You're not dead." The king tried to sit, but weakness pinned him down. His breath came in shallow gasps. Shadows clung to him, whispering threats, pulling him back into the dark. Omega's hands glowed faintly, warmth radiating through the king, binding him to the living world. "You dare defy the court!" a priest cried, advancing toward them. "This is treason!" "I dare save him," Omega said sharply, "and I won't let the curse claim him." The shadows hissed and shrank at her words, recoiling as though the very air obeyed her courage. Omega's pulse quickened, but she held fast. This was no longer about rebellion. It was about life, about justice, about a man who was more than a symbol. He was the Alpha King, and she knew that deep inside, his strength could return. As the guards approached, hesitant but commanded to act, Omega realized she had little time. She needed to move him, to hide him until she could decipher the curse fully. She whispered to him, "You must trust me. You have to. Can you walk?" The king tried, his legs trembling like saplings in a storm. He reached for her hand, gripping it with a faint but desperate strength. I don't understand." "How?" "Later," Omega said. "We have to go. Now." With great effort, the king leaned on her shoulder. Shadows flitted around the hall like dark birds, but the pulse of life between Omega and the king kept them at bay. The crowd, frozen in fear and awe, watched them vanish into the side corridors, where the torches flickered and the stone felt alive beneath their feet. In the hidden passageways of the palace, the king's breathing grew steadier, but the fear in his eyes did not vanish. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Why?" Omega did not answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed ahead, moving through darkness lit by faint torches. "Because someone had to," she finally said. "Because I could feel you were not gone, and because no one else would risk the truth." The king looked at her, struggling to rise to his full height, yet unable to. Pride and confusion warred in his expression. "And if they find us?" "They won't," she said, though a sliver of doubt crept into her heart. "Not yet. But we must be careful. The curse is not broken, and the moment it realizes you are awake—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. The king understood. The walls around them whispered, shadows writhed, and the air was thick with magic that could strangle a man as easily as it could sustain him. Omega guided him to a hidden chamber beneath the palace, one she had discovered as a child when exploring forbidden corridors. It was small, empty, except for dust and old stones, yet safe. Here, she could tend to him, keep him alive until she uncovered the secrets of the curse. He sank to the floor, leaning against the cold stone, exhausted. Omega knelt beside him, placing her hands on his chest once more. "You're alive," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "And we will keep you that way." For the first time in decades, the Alpha King felt hope, not for his crown, not for his throne, but for himself, and for the girl who had risked everything to stop the world from declaring him dead. And as the candles in the hidden chamber flickered and shadows danced on the walls, Omega knew one truth with absolute certainty. He is not dead, and neither is the fight for his life. The whisper of something ancient stirred in the darkness outside the chamber door. A presence older than the kingdom itself had taken notice, and it did not approve. But for now, the king's chest rose and fell steadily, and Omega's hands glowed with determination. The battle for life had begun, and the shadows had yet to claim their due. Outside the hidden chamber in the silent halls of the palace, the wind moaned through broken windows carrying a single chilling message. The Alpha King was awake, and the world would never be the same again. The hidden chamber beneath the palace was silent, except for the quiet, labored breaths of the Alpha King. Shadows clung to the corners like waiting predators, yet the air felt alive with a strange energy. Omega knelt beside him, her hands pressed to his chest, feeling the faint pulse of life that flickered like a candle in a storm. The king's eyes, once sharp and commanding, were clouded with confusion and pain. He tried to rise, but weakness pinned him to the cold stone floor. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice raw, unfamiliar even to himself. "You're safe," Omega said softly, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. "For now, but you are not well. The curse, it has taken part of you, trapped you between life and death. I am the only one who can help you." He frowned, frustration mixed with disbelief. "A curse?" His voice cracked. "I am a king. No curse can bind me." Omega shook her head gently. "You are human, despite what the crown demands. And even the strongest can fall. I can feel it inside you, the fear, the pride, the part of you that refuses to surrender. That part must survive." The king's gaze softened, curiosity and suspicion mingling with something he did not understand. "And why? Would you risk yourself for me?" "Because someone has to," she said, her eyes steady. "And because you are not dead, not yet." For the first time, the king looked at her with more than confusion. There was a spark of awe, perhaps even gratitude, hidden behind the exhaustion in his eyes. He realized that this small, seemingly fragile girl had defied the entire court to touch him, to protect him from a fate that everyone else had accepted. Omega guided him to a stack of old cushions she had brought. "Rest here. I need to study the curse, to understand how to break it," she explained. She rose and moved to the far side of the chamber, where faint inscriptions decorated the stone walls, old marks, older than the kingdom itself. She traced her fingers over the symbols, feeling the lingering magic. The king's breathing steadied, but the shadows seemed restless. They moved along the walls like dark smoke, whispering threats and promises that only Omega could hear. "The curse is old," she murmured. "Older than the palace. It is clever. It doesn't kill outright. It traps, it weakens, it feeds on fear and pride. And it grows stronger when others believe you are gone." He tilted his head, listening but not fully understanding. "So, I was dead in their eyes. And that made it worse? Yes, Omega said. Their belief is part of the spell. The more they mourned, the more the curse tightened. She paused. I have to be careful. One wrong move, and it could take you completely. The king exhaled slowly, the weight of his situation settling in. And you? You are here because? Omega met his gaze, unflinching. Because I can feel the truth, and because I will not let you die while I still live. The king's hand twitched, reaching for hers. She took it, and a shock of energy passed between them, warm, potent, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He felt it, a lifeline, a tether to the living world that had nearly abandoned him. You are stronger than you seem, he said softly, all laced with something deeper, something unspoken. I have to be, she replied. If I fail, you die, and the kingdom falls into shadows. The curse, it will spread if it is not contained. For hours, Omega worked. She studied the inscriptions, whispered protective charms, and traced her fingers along the king's veins, feeling the ebb and flow of power trapped inside him. He rested, regaining fragments of strength, but not all at once. With each heartbeat, he seemed both himself and not himself, alpha and man, king and prisoner. As night deepened, the chamber grew colder. A faint wind howled through the cracks in the stone, carrying whispers she could barely hear. Omega. The king's voice was weak, but insistent. The shadows. They speak. I hear them too. Yes, she whispered. I know. But they cannot touch you while I am here. Not yet. They test you, try to scare you. But fear feeds them. Do not give them that. He clenched his jaw, pride flaring, even in weakness. I have faced armies, I have faced storms and rebels. I will not give in to whispers. Omega smiled faintly. No, but this is different. You cannot fight them with strength alone. You must trust me. A moment of silence passed, filled with the soft sound of their breathing and the distant creaking of the palace above. The king studied her, and in that moment, he began to see more than just the girl who had stopped his burial. He saw courage, intelligence, and a determination that defied the natural order. A connection formed, a fragile bond that neither of them fully understood, but could not ignore. Hours turned into days. Omega rationed food and water, tending to the king's wounds and slowly helping him regain control over his weakened body. Each small success brought relief, but also more danger. The curse, sensing progress, grew restless. Shadows gathered at the edges of the chamber, whispering of betrayal, power, and death. One night, as the wind howled outside, Omega traced an intricate pattern over the king's chest. Her hands glowed faintly as she whispered words of protection. For the first time, he felt warmth spread through his body, a sensation of life, returning, not forced, but real. Stronger, he murmured. I feel stronger. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the fatigue that weighed on her. But not fully. The curse is clever. It hides itself in fear, in doubt, in pride. We have to confront it directly. He frowned, suddenly aware of his vulnerability. And if we fail? Omega's eyes met his, unwavering. We do not fail. I will not let you die again. But you must trust me, even when it is hard. For the first time, the king allowed himself to relax, not fully, but enough to lean on her strength. I will try. The next morning brought more than light. A messenger from the court, sent by one of the rival nobles, appeared near the hidden chamber. He had not known the king was alive. Omega sensed the danger immediately. She held her hand over the king's chest, feeling his pulse quicken. "They are coming," she whispered. "They suspect. We cannot stay here." The king struggled to rise, now stronger, though not fully recovered. "Then we leave," he said, determination sharpening his tone. "Show me where to go." Together, they navigated the secret passages of the palace. Every step carried the tension of discovery. Shadows seemed to twist and stretch, reaching for them. Yet the bond between Omega and the king shielded him from the worst of it. As they emerged into an abandoned wing of the palace, the king paused, looking back. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. "And yet, I do not even know your name fully." "Omega," she replied, a faint smile crossing her face. "Just Omega. That is enough for now." He studied her, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. "Then Omega, you have my trust. And perhaps more than that." She felt the weight of his words, but there was no time for sentiment. The shadows had sensed them, and the rival nobles would not wait long. She led him to a small courtyard hidden from view, overgrown with wild herbs and vines, a place she had discovered in her explorations as a child. It was safe for the moment. As night fell, they built a small fire. The flickering flames cast their shadows on the walls, and the king finally allowed himself to speak of the burden he carried, the throne, the expectations, the fear of failure. Omega listened, offering wisdom and counsel. "You are strong," she said, "stronger than anyone knows, but even the strongest cannot face every shadow alone. That is why you must allow trust, and perhaps something more." He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes, and felt a strange longing, a connection that went beyond duty or survival. You are unlike anyone I have met. And yet, I feel as though I have known you forever." Omega felt the same pull, a dangerous and thrilling bond that intertwined their fates. But before either could dwell on it, a chilling wind swept through the courtyard. The flames flickered violently, and shadows loomed closer. Taller, darker than before. Omega's hands glowed once more, protective energy radiating around them. The king rose to stand beside her, now ready to face the enemy that had once trapped him. From the darkness beyond the courtyard, a figure stepped forward. Cloaked, silent, ancient, a guardian of the royal line, older than the palace itself. Its eyes glimmered with a cold light. "You are alive," the figure intoned, voice echoing like a tomb. "And yet you trespass? The curse belongs to you. You cannot escape it forever." The king's jaw tightened. "I will not be bound by shadows," he said, voice strong, pride and defiance mixing with the tremor of fear. Omega tightened her grip on his arm. "It is here for us," she whispered, "and we will face it together." The guardian raised its hand, shadows twisting like black fire around its fingers. Energy crackled, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The king faltered slightly, the curse responding, testing his resolve, seeking to reclaim him. Omega's eyes glowed bright. "Do not falter. Hold on. Fight with me." The king's hand met hers, and together they pushed against the darkness. But even as they did, the guardian's gaze held a promise. The fight was far from over. The night air quivered with magic, tension, and the promise of battles yet to come. And as the flames of their fire danced against the ancient walls, both Omega and the Alpha King knew a truth that would haunt them until the end. Even life reclaimed from death carries its own shadows. The ancient guardian's presence filled the courtyard like a storm waiting to break. Its cloak of shadows twisted and shimmered, dark and alive, stretching across the ground like inky tendrils. The Alpha King and Omega stood side by side, their hands joined, forming a bond that pulsed with energy neither fully understood. "You defy fate. the guardian intoned, its voice echoing like stone grinding on stone. The curse is older than your kingdom, older than your bloodline. Life was never meant to escape its grasp. Omega tightened her grip on the king's hand. Life belongs to those who fight for it, and he has not finished his journey. Her voice was calm, unwavering, even as the shadows whipped around them. The king's chest rose and fell, his body stronger now, his will tempered by survival and guided by Omega's steady courage. "I will not kneel to shadows," he said, his voice a deep, resonant echo of the power he had once commanded. "I am Alpha, I am king, and I am alive because she saved me." The guardian's shadowed fingers lashed forward, aiming to pierce the barrier of light Omega created. Sparks of energy collided in the air, throwing the courtyard into a swirl of darkness and light. The Alpha King instinctively raised his hands, sending waves of strength into the battle. Though the curse still lingered within him, it recoiled against his determination, weakened by the courage he now shared with Omega. "You are strong," the guardian said, voice tinged with surprise. "But strength alone cannot undo what was done. Only understanding and acceptance can free him." Omega's eyes met the king's. They were both exhausted, battered by shadows, yet a quiet clarity settled between them. The king nodded, the weight of years of pride and fear lifting slowly. "I understand," he said. "I have always fought with my sword, but I see now. It is not only the sword that saves, but the heart." "Yes," Omega whispered. "You must trust me. Trust yourself. Let go of the fear, the pride, and the shadow will weaken." The guardian's tendrils lashed again, striking toward the king. This time, instead of resistance, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel. He let Omega's energy flow through him, binding him not to her strength alone, but to his own rediscovered will. The tendrils recoiled, the darkness shrieking as it faltered. "Hold my hand!" Omega cried, and the king grasped hers firmly. Together they focused on life, on hope, on connection, and the first rays of dawn began to pierce the twilight sky, spilling light across the courtyard. The guardian paused, shadows trembling as if caught between two worlds. "So, it is love that binds you?" it asked, its tone less threatening, almost contemplative. The king and Omega exchanged a glance, both understanding the truth without speaking it aloud. "Yes," the king said, "not for power, not for glory. For life, for trust, for courage, for her." Omega's cheeks warmed, a faint blush in the dim light. "And for you," she said simply, "for you to see yourself beyond the crown, beyond the shadows." The guardian's shadows shivered, then began to fade, curling back into the unseen corners of the world. "Very well," it said finally. "You have reclaimed what was nearly lost, but beware, power and shadow are never fully gone. Even love cannot shield you from all the darkness that lies ahead." With that, it vanished, leaving only the whisper of wind through the overgrown courtyard. The king sank to one knee, finally free from the weight of the curse. He looked at Omega, his golden eyes reflecting both gratitude and something more, something tender that had grown in the shared silence of fear and danger. "I owe you my life," he said. "More than life. You saved me when no one else dared. I cannot repay you fully." Omega knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to," she said softly. "What matters is that you are alive, that we both are." For a moment, they simply held each other's hands, silent, the first warmth of morning surrounding them. The kingdom above still slept, unaware of the miracle that had unfolded beneath its walls. But neither the Alpha King nor Omega could ignore the bond that had formed. Born in shadows and danger, tempered by trust and courage. "We must return," the king said finally, his voice stronger now, full of command and clarity. The court believes me dead. They will move to take power. I cannot leave my people unprotected." "I know," Omega said. "But you are stronger now, and together we can face them. You do not need to face it alone." The king rose fully, muscles coiling with regained strength, and held out his hand to Omega. She took it, and together they moved through the hidden passages of the palace, shadows retreating before their determination. As they emerged into the grand hall, the court was already in chaos. Nobles whispered urgently, guards shuffled nervously, and the priest's chants faltered, interrupted by panic. The news of the king's return spread like wildfire, sending waves of disbelief and awe through the assembly. The Alpha King stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with authority. "I am alive," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Alive because one courageous girl dared to challenge the shadows that bound me. Alive because hope and trust are stronger than fear." Gasps swept through the court. Whispers rose into murmurs, murmurs into cries. The rival nobles paled, realizing that their plot had failed. Their shadows, once strong, had been banished by courage, trust, and love. Omega remained at his side, silent but radiant, her presence a symbol of loyalty, courage, and the quiet strength that had saved the kingdom. The king turned his gaze toward her, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. "You," he began, his voice low, almost reverent. "You were the light in the darkness. Without you, I would be gone. And yet here you are," Omega replied, her voice soft, steady, "stronger than before, alive and ready to reclaim your place. That is what matters." He stepped closer, the glow of early sunlight catching the edges of his armor, the crown of a king heavy but rightful upon his head. "No," he said firmly, "what matters is that I see you, that I can repay you, not with gold or power, but with my loyalty, my life, and perhaps in time with my heart." Omega's breath caught, a mix of fear and hope swirling within her. "Your heart?" she asked, a small smile forming. "Yes," the king said, his hand brushing hers once more. "I have seen courage, wisdom, and loyalty beyond measure, and I am grateful in ways I cannot yet name." The court remained in stunned silence, witnessing a king reborn and perhaps something more, an unspoken bond, a promise of trust and connection. The rival nobles, realizing they had been outmaneuvered not by force alone, but by something deeper, slunk away, their plans dissolved. The priests, hesitant yet awestruck, bowed and whispered prayers of thanks to the unseen forces that had allowed the king's return. The palace itself seemed to breathe, shadows receding and light spilling into every corner. The Alpha King turned fully to Omega, the weight of responsibility still heavy but tempered by relief and trust. "You saved me," he said, "and now the kingdom is safe because of you. But more than that, you saved me as a man, as someone who can feel, who can hope, and who can trust again." Omega felt warmth rise in her chest. "Then we have both survived," she said. "Together." He nodded, his hand gently taking hers. "Together." The morning light grew stronger, and for the first time in decades, the palace seemed alive, not just with people, but with possibility. Shadows still lingered at the edges, a reminder that darkness was never fully gone. But the bond between them had forged a strength that even shadows could not destroy. And as the Alpha King looked into Omega's eyes, he knew that his life was no longer his alone. It belonged to the kingdom, yes, but it also belonged to her, the girl who had stopped his burial, who had defied fate, and who had awakened something long buried in his heart. Omega squeezed his hand, understanding the unspoken promise between them. Life reclaimed from death carries its own shadows, but it also carries the power to love, to trust, and to transform. Outside the palace, the wind carried the whispers of change. The kingdom would awaken to a new day, one ruled not only by power and law, but by courage, redemption, and the quiet strength of hearts intertwined. And somewhere at the northern cliffs where the battle had once claimed the king, the first birds of morning sang, their songs carrying a single truth. He is not dead. And with her by his side, he will never be truly alone again. The Alpha King lifted his chin, shoulders squared, and for the first time in his life, he smiled. Not as a ruler burdened by duty, but as a man who had seen darkness, faced it, and survived it with someone he could trust completely. Omega's hand in his was no longer a tether but a promise, and the world, vast and uncertain, awaited them, together.